What would you do if you knew for sure you would fail, and yet you'd be willing to do it over and over and over until you got it right? That's your passion, right? So your values lie in the things that you're willing to fail at, the things that you're willing to suck at, the things where you're willing to sit in the discomfort, because that's the only path to growth. And so every time we achieve something, it's incredible, it's amazing, it's humbling, it's wonderful. And the success that you've had shows you a potential you never even knew you had.
Welcome to the Relaunch Podcast. And today I have somebody that I have admired. I have been watching her throughout at least the last 5 years, kind of like just take the world on like this incredible quantum leap, going over things. And I wanted to bring her on because she has accomplished so many different areas of her life leading to where she is now. So many different relaunches. We're going to go through, a few of those, but her name is Laura Gassner Otting, and she is a powerhouse of bold leadership and transformations, from impactful roles in the White House to founding a top executive search firm and becoming a best-selling author with Wonderhell. Laura knows how to turn big ideas into extraordinary achievements. She's been featured on Good Morning America, The Today Show, Harvard Business Review, and she's here to challenge you to think bigger, lead fearlessly, and chase not just small goals, but audacious goals. In today's episode, we are going to dive into the roller coasters of success, why it excites us, frustrates us, and we're going to hear her top tips for building the career that you've always wanted. This conversation will light a fire under you and leave you ready to take your next big leap. All right, Laura, good to have you and super excited
Well,
to
that was
dig
quite a
in.
buildup. So, I gotta really bring it.
I got to tell you, you should have seen what they originally had. I would have been here like 15 minutes. I'm like, okay, everyone, she's great. I get that. All right. So I always like to start with, what is the most significant relaunch that really shaped who you are today, that really
Oh,
changed the course of
sure.
you?
That's easy. I dropped out of law school because I heard this unknown presidential hopeful talking about this idea of community service in exchange for college tuition. And I thought that needs to happen. At the time, I was I was in the beginning of my first year of law school. I didn't really want to be in law school, but I had been told by everybody I knew growing up, from teachers to family to, celebrities, right? Like, being a lawyer is great. You should be a lawyer. I had a fourth grade teacher who said, "You're pretty argumentative. You should be a lawyer." And of course, I told her she was
You're
wrong
like, "Oh, great. That's
because
awesome."
I'm argumentative. But everything I saw around me was like, this is a great path. And so I got to law school and I looked around and I was like, I don't want to, this is not interesting to me. And I did what a lot of us women do when we find ourselves in miserable situations. I dated the world's worst boyfriend. And I joke around, in my keynotes, I tell the story on stage and I say, the world's worst boyfriend had exquisite taste in precisely two things. The first, obviously, being girlfriends, and the second being presidential candidates. And he gave me a ride home from school one day. We stopped at this guy's campaign office and I picked up some paperwork, and there was a little video of then Governor Bill Clinton talking about the idea that would become the signature promise of his campaign, which would become AmeriCorps when he was in office. So I saw that. It made so much sense to me. I was, if I'm being honest, kind of running away from where I was and sort of running towards something, but mostly away. But he ended up in the White House. I ended up in the White House, and my entire life changed because of it.
And how long did you do that? How long were you part of that world? Because then things changed yet again.
Yeah, so I spent the better half of that year on the campaign trail, and then I ended up in the transition office and then in the White House. I spent 4 years in the White House. And at that point, I was 25, almost 26 years old, and I wanted to get back on the campaign trail. And my then boss said, in the way that only like a father figure mentor type could say, Laura, you're too young, or he said, you're too old to get back on a campaign bus and eat cold pizza and sleep on high school gymnasium floors. And you're kind of too young to be the domestic policy advisor. So there's not really like, being 26 on a presidential campaign is like dog years, you're like 107. And so he said, you should talk to my
That's
friend
because
Arnie
nobody
Miller.
really wants to. That's because nobody really wants to be in the bus eating cold pizza,
Yeah,
except
no, it's terrible.
21,
But
21 to
also like,
24 year olds.
but also it's exciting and you're filled with idealism, and it's and this was 1996, so this is right after Newt Gingrich, but like long before the vitriol of the current day, so it was still filled with like hope and joy. I still believe in a place called hope, right? Like it was just a different time. And but he said, you should go talk to my friend Arnie Miller. He runs Isaac Miller, which is the biggest search firm in the country that does specifically nonprofit work. You'll go talk to him. He'll find you a job in the nonprofit sector, and then you'll come back in 4 years and do something on the Gore campaign. And I was like, that's great. Sounds terrific. I went to talk to Arnie, and within 5 minutes of sitting down with Arnie, I realized that his office was in Boston. And at the time, I was dating the world's best boyfriend. And I was like, I think he's the one. He's about to move to Boston for a job. I should move to Boston. So I was like, what if I came to work for you? And Arnie said, yeah, you should come work for me. That'd be great. And I was like, terrific. What do you do? And that's how I became a headhunter. I mean, that's it. And then I worked for Arnie for 4 years, and I really learned from the best and the brightest about how to do this work at the highest levels, like how to be just absolutely impeccable recruiting the senior talent organizations that weave our civic infrastructure. But then I had a moment of rage, Hilary. And the moment of rage was, I think I can do this better and smarter and faster and with more authenticity and more integrity and less cost to my clients and more profit for my people if we did it a different way. And I marched into Arnie's office like, Jerry Maguire. And I was like, there is a better way. And he was like, there's the door, like you can stay and do things our way. We love you. You're great. Or if you really want to do things your way, then you got to leave. And, there's that moment when you realize you're actually not part of your client's solutions, that it makes you realize that you're part of their problems. And that's the moment I think where relaunch has to happen, because that moment where I realized that the way that the search firm was organized, it was profits first, mission second. And I was like, mission first, profits will come. I couldn't stay. It was an untenable place to stay because I wasn't part of their solution. It left me in only one place, which is that I was part of their problem. And I couldn't keep
What's
coming into
interesting,
work.
what's interesting about that is I call it 3HQ alignment, where you've got your headquarters within you, you got your head, your heart, your highest self, best
Yes.
version of you. And when you're out of alignment, you can't force it. It's just not in you. And so you're out of integrity. And so that's what happened to you. So what happened then?
So I left and I launched my own search firm. And by the way, I did it right when I was about 11 months pregnant with my first child. So note to all the listeners, maybe maybe that's not an easy time to relaunch. But I,
To
you
start your
know,
own business is, and this would have been your first one.
yes, yes. So I'm sure that you speak to a lot of entrepreneurs. I'm sure that your listeners listen to lots of podcasts of entrepreneurs, and they tell these stories about how like they had this bold vision and they created the thing and it grew and it was great. Well, okay, here's what really happened. I started that company and I ran it for 15 years and we grew 100% year over
Wow,
year over
that's
year over year.
unbelievable.
However, it also needs to be said that the reason I started that firm was because I knew I couldn't stay where I was. And so I left. I went and I had 24 hours of labor in an unplanned C-section. And 6 weeks later, I'm sitting at my kitchen table holding this person in my arms who's basically still a stranger to me. And my phone rings and it's a friend of mine from my old White House days. And she goes, so, ew, I heard you had a baby. Cool, I guess. But are you still doing search? Because our CEO just left and we need to find a new one. And I was like, I looked at the baby and I looked at the phone. I looked at my laptop sitting in front of me and I was like, yes, I am. And she's like,
What are you looking
great. What are you going to charge me? And I was like, $100 an hour. And she was like, great, send me a contract. Baby in hand, one hand. And I'm like pecking at the keyboard, how to write a professional services contract. And then I press send. And that's how my business was really born. But I also knew that I knew the values that I wanted to uphold, and the route through all uncertainty is anchored in the values that we hold dear. And so as long as I was clear on the values, that made it very easy for me to understand what work I wanted to take and what work I didn't want to take. And the work that I wanted to take was work that I was going to excel at. And good work begets more good work. And the better we did, the more our reputation grew and the more that we grew. And again, 100% year over year until we had, a global search firm. But I just wanted to make sure that this relaunch isn't always like, and everything's great, because it's not. And it starts off
Hard.
messy and sloppy and ugly and
It's
hard. And you just have to keep showing up.
So let me ask you, a lot of people try to figure out that whole core values. What is it? And as you said, when it matches, it's amazing.
Yeah.
And when I really nailed what my core values were, and then I realized that growth and connection and the joy of, like, just joy of life, when I put those together in the business, that's when everything took off. But how did you nail down your core? Because right now you got a baby in your hand, you're trying to do this, you're trying to figure out, how do I even run this? How did you put those core values together?
Well, listen, everybody always says follow your passion. And I think that that's the spoken word illegitimate career advice sister of the live laugh love tattoo. It's just awful. Like it's not useful. It's like an Instagram meme. It's terrible. And they're like, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? That's your passion. And I'm like, no, what would you do if you knew for sure you would fail? And yet you'd be willing to do it over and over and over until you got it
Great
right.
way, great way to reframe that. Yeah.
That's your passion, right? So your values lie in the things that you're willing to fail at, the things that you're willing to suck at, the things where you're willing to sit in the discomfort, because that's the only path to growth. And so every time we achieve something, and this is what I talk about in Wonderhell, it's incredible, it's amazing, it's humbling, it's wonderful. And the success that you've had shows you a potential you never even knew you had. And inside of that potential is an increased pace of a bigger hunger, right? These larger goals. And in that increased hunger and the faster pace and the larger goals is also doubt and uncertainty and anxiety and stress. So it's wonderful to achieve something and see this new potential, but it's also kind of hell. So it's wonder hell. And wonder hell is the space where the burden of your potential comes in and looks at you and unpacks its backpack and is like, hey, Hilary, what you got for me, huh? Like, what are you going to do with this newfound potential? And in that moment, in my boss's office, I knew that there was another way and I wanted to figure it out. In that moment, when my old White House friend called me up, I was like, oh, maybe I could just do this by myself. Like, that'd be kind of cool. And I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I saw that new version of me. I could be the person who actually does this on my own, my way. And so when you see that vision of yourself and who you can become and who you can embody, if you're willing to hear that voice inside your head, not as a limitation, but as an invitation to all that you can become, what you care about becomes pretty clear. Your values become pretty clear. I knew that I could become the person who created my own firm, who did the work differently if I put my clients first,
But
right? Like that was a core value.
you ended up saying Wonder Hell is not a breakdown, but a breakthrough.
Yes.
And you say that you put your clients first because that was the most important thing. When you're talking about Wonder Hell, that's something that we go through a lot, just like relaunches, right? I mean, you keep pushing. Tell us more about this concept and why you wrote that book.
Yeah, so I wrote that book because when my last book came out, Limitless, I had launched that book with absolutely no platform. So just to back up a stitch, I ran that search firm for 15 years and I sold it to the women who helped me build it. Why? Because I was at that point where I kind of like solved the problems. I'd done the things and I wanted to do something else, but I had no idea what I wanted to do. I just knew I didn't want to do that anymore. So I sold the company to them and I was thinking about what was going to come next. And while during that summer of figuring it out, I had this moment where I got lady who lunched is the way that I like to call it. I didn't have anything else going on. So I got voluntold to run an art auction for a local nonprofit. And I didn't want to get on stage and speak because that's terrifying. Right. And so right before they start the auction, a friend of mine gets on stage. She's a local newscaster. And she's like, I'd like to thank my dear friend, Laura Gassner Otting, who dedicates her life to philanthropy. And I was like, what? Do what now? Who? Like, there's nothing wrong with that. And I've spent a lot of my life dedicated to philanthropy. But in that moment, I was wearing like a couture gown that was donated by one of the fashion sponsors. And I was wearing these diamonds that were donated by one of the jewelry sponsors. And I'm sitting next to my husband who works in the finance sector. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm a lady who lunches. Like, what's going on? So I went home
I
that
love
night.
that lady who lunches.
I went, and there's nothing wrong with being a lady who lunges, but it was one dimension and all of a sudden it was the whole of myself. And I did not like that very much because I had this crisis of identity. So I went home that night, and because I'm
That's actually
super
right
clever,
there. I wanted just a crisis of identity because you had left your former, you had sold it, had
I
been
was LGO CEO. Who am I when I'm no longer, I'd sold the company and I was literally unemployed. And I didn't know who I was. And so I went home that night, and because I'm super clever, I bought LauraGassnerOtting.com.
right.
And I started blogging about things that were bothering me in the world. And the executive producer of TEDx Cambridge saw one of my blog posts and said, you should give a TEDx talk about that. And I went, no way. That's terrifying. Again, I don't want to speak in public. And my kids kind of bullied me into it. And so I went and I spoke. And then I got an offer to go speak somewhere for money. And I was like, wait a minute, that's a job? Like, tell me more about this job. And so I started going to places to speak, and I started noticing that the people who were getting paid, quote unquote, real money all had books. So I was like, I got to get me one of them. Okay.
Uh,
So that brings us up
wait, wait, I gotta
to
step
current.
back. I gotta step back because what was the first TEDx that you did? What was
So the
that?
first TEDx was called Stop Asking How Can I Help? And it was all based around this idea that, like, when there's a massive crisis somewhere in the world, we send teddy bears. And teddy bears don't do squat to
Mm,
actually help, because we send thousands and thousands and thousands of teddy bears, and maybe six get into the hands of these children, like these tiny rays of hope that they are meant to be. And there's nothing wrong with sending a teddy bear, but it doesn't actually stop the thing from happening again, right? Like, sending teddy bears when there has been a tsunami does not make Mother Nature not send more tsunamis. What makes Mother Nature, what makes people survive when Mother Nature sends another one, is actually sending money so that they can create early warning detection, right? There's other things that they can do. So if we stop asking, how can I help? But we ask, what needs to happen for the people who are actually in crisis, we come up with different answers. We don't send teddy bears, maybe we send money. We don't send winter coats to Haiti, maybe we send blood, right? Like, what are the things that we actually need to be doing? And so that
what
was the
do you
first talk.
need? What do you
Yeah,
need?
and
And
and I
then you got in there and you got a paid speaking gig. You were like, wait a second.
I got paid $1,500 in round trip tickets to Boise, Idaho, and I got a hat with a potato on it, which is very exciting. I still have it to this day. And then I was like, the people who are getting paid real money have books. I should get me one of them. And so I wrote Limitless. I had zero platform. I had no newsletter. I barely had a website. I mean, it was like Fisher Price, my first job
And
kind of
Laura,
thing
when
going
was
on.
that? How long ago was this?
This was 2019 when Limitless came out. So it was 5 years ago. And uh, somehow that book ended up debuting at number 2 on the Washington Post bestseller list, right behind Michelle Obama, which
Incredible.
sounds very impressive, except if you know that just means I sold a lot of books in the greater Maryland, Virginia, DC area. But it sounds, because it's the Washington Post, like it's a
It
big
sounds
major national paper, right?
fantastic.
So here's a theme, listeners. There's a little bit of Wizard of Oz that happens in the relaunch. So number 2 in the Washington Post bestseller list, right behind Michelle Obama, sounds way more impressive than I probably sold 300 books in the greater Washington. Now, Michelle Obama sold like 9 million, but still, like, that whole sentence is very impressive and makes me seem like a bigger deal. So that book comes out, and I am exhausted.
And
I
I
did
love
it.
how humble you are, girl. Because I mean,
I
this
mean,
is
I just want to be like, I just feel like there's a lot of people that are like, yeah, and I dropped out of college and I like built Amazon in my garage. Yay. Right.
no,
Like, there's
right.
so much more of the story.
There's a lot more, and you put it out there like, hey, this is the reality. That's what
Yeah.
I really like about you. So you ended up having Limitless, but then you went in and you decided recently, I need another book.
Yes. Well, so what happened with Limitless is I worked so hard to get that book launched, and I was so exhausted when in the moment, in the middle of the red eye, when I get this text message from my publisher saying your book just debuted, number 2. I was so tired, and I'd like left my humility somewhere like in the airport waiting lounge of the flight that I was on. And I was like, number 2, how do you get to be number 1? And suddenly I was stuck in Wonderhell. It was like, this is amazing. And also, now I feel the burden of this potential that, like, I could do more. So how do I do more? And then the pandemic happened. So I spent most of the pandemic just basically creating content for people who follow me on social media. And I interviewed 100 different glass ceiling shatterers, Olympic medalists, startup unicorns, thought leaders, creatives, philanthropists, activists, everyday people like you and me about how they got out of this space of Wonderhell. And what I learned is that you don't get out of it, you don't survive it, you learn how to thrive in it. And so Wonderhell is really all about the lessons that I learned from all of these people along the way. And so that I tested that idea on another TEDx stage, and I think that talk has almost 3 million views right now, which is
It does,
kind of
because I
mind
did
blowing.
watch it. It was fantastic. And
Yeah.
yes, and for those that haven't seen it yet, and they should, you absolutely should go watch it. And again, it's called Why Doesn't Success Bring Happiness? You talk about the what you've done in Wonderhell, but what was your main goal of delivering that one?
My main goal was to figure out how I can get myself out of Wonderhell. That's really all it was. But there was no reason to write another book if I wasn't going to like get another crown, another jewel.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of ways to relaunch. And a lot of times when you relaunch, somebody says, just do lots and lots and lots of volume. Just keep going, keep going, keep going. And like someone will notice you and it'll be great. And I think that's horse hooey, right? I look at people who are doing public speaking, for example, and the way to make a lot of money public speaking is either you do a ton of volume and you speak and you speak and you speak and you speak, and then eventually somebody gives you like a little bit more money each time because you're so busy. Or you have huge IP, that's like a New York Times #1 bestseller, you're under the oak tree with Oprah and everybody wants you, great. Or you have some sort of like celebrity shine, celebrity proximity. And I looked at those and I was like, you know what? I'm 53. I'm not gonna. I don't want to do the volume. I don't want to live on an airplane and like travel around to like Elks lodges and like speak to 6 veterans and two
Yeah.
of the wait staff. Like I'm not gonna get there fast enough at 53 to do that. Um, it's a real sort of lightning in a bottle to like get picked by Oprah, right? Like I don't know if I can do that, but what I can do is I can like pitch myself to media. I can say things not like Limitless was a bestseller, but #2 in the Washington Post bestseller right behind Michelle Obama, which makes me seem shinier. And so my goal with Wonderhell is I want to make the Wall Street Journal bestseller list. Because I know if I make the Wall Street Journal bestseller list, boom, that's a bump up in my speaking fee. That makes me look shinier. It makes me look more de-risked for the people who might want to put me on their stage, on their screen. And so my entire strategy for this sort of relaunching into the speaking world is to say, who are the people who I want to be my peers? What are the jewels in the crowns that they have on their heads? And how do I go get them? What is the
Oh,
fastest and most expedient and also most integrity filled way to go get there? Because I'm not saying I want to go do
so
this big
this is
thing. I'm
really
saying I have
interesting.
30 years of experience that I can do this big thing with.
Did we lose her?
So why not go try to do the big thing? Why should I wait in line with the people who have 3 years of experience when I have 30? There's a skill set you need to get on a stage, to get on a screen, to do that. But you can't just have the skill set. You've also got to have the background. So in a relaunch, you think about like what are the transferable skills I have, right? I've presented in front of clients, maybe I could present in front of an audience. But also what are the translatable skills? I understand because I came out of politics, how to come up with an idea, how to be like emotionally resonant, and then how to land the plane quickly with a soundbite. That's absolutely translatable to media, right? So like what are your transferable skills and what are your translatable skills? And through those and the burden of the potential that you feel, that's where your relaunch comes from.
Okay, so how are we doing against your goal?
Well, Wonderhell debuted on the Wall Street Journal bestseller list, but also at #2.
I already knew that. I just wanted you to say it.
So it seems, damn James Clear. I don't know who on earth does not actually have a copy of his book yet, but that man still sells so many books every single week. So yes, #2. But I should say, in the process of writing a book proposal for my next book. And my goal for that is New York Times. Why not?
You know what? Why not?
Mama needs her jewels.
And I love, yes, exactly. More jewels for the crown, which is a very good thing. But here's the thing I want to just ask you. You are a regular correspondent for today's show for Good Morning America. What do you find is the thing that right now is resonating, given that, your background and everything is resonating the most out there in our country? What do they want to hear from you?
I think everybody's interested in reinvention. I think everybody right now is interested in, like, a lot of people came out of the pandemic saying, when life gets back to normal, is the normal I'm going back to really the life I want? And I think most people said not really, right? I don't not think there are a lot of people that are like, absolutely 100%. I want things exactly the way they were. I think we all learned a lot of lessons, some good, some bad. And we learned again about what we really valued. And so people came out of the last few years feeling like they want to live, they want to be reinvented. There's a certain amount of time we have left on this earth. What do we want to do with it? And so the it's no surprise to me that your podcast on relaunching is so successful, because people really do want to relaunch. They want to do something new. I also happen to be Gen X. As I mentioned, I'm 53. I have two kids in college, and I'm at that sort of empty nester stage where it's like, okay, I probably have 20 great years left. I likely have 10 good years after that. And then the years after 83, maybe they're good, maybe they're great, maybe they're terrible, maybe they don't exist. Who knows, right? So I'm like looking at the time and I'm thinking,
Mm.
well, there's a lot of things I want to do in this life. And so what I'm finding is that every time I talk, like, people want insights, they want practical strategies, they want a motivation, but really it has to do a lot with, like, how do I figure out what makes me special? What's my it factor? And how do I use that to reinvent myself?
So 100%. And I do have to ask you this: midlife, right? There seems to be now this, women are wanting so desperately to be relevant at our age, and I'm Gen X too. We want that, but how do you at this point, and you said there are more things that you want to do, there are more things that I want to do. I'm like, I see it as, wow, it's go time. Like, we got to do this now, no
Yeah.
time to waste. So how are you looking at being kind of in the game as a midlifer?
I take great liberation at the fact that as a midlife woman, we are basically invisible, which
Mm.
means we could spend a lot of time doing the work in the dark, messing up, learning, trying again before anybody even notices that we're on the field. That's actually super liberating if you think about it. It means we're not embarrassed. It means nobody's paying attention to us. We don't have to be self conscious. We don't have to feel like an imposter, because by the time people notice that we're there, it's because we are kicking so much ass that they can't ignore us. So
I
for
love this.
me,
I got
I
to
think
tell
that's
you,
pretty great.
I got to tell you, in my book, Relaunch Spark Your Heart to Ignite Your Life, there is a whole section about be invisible so you can be visible. Like, go for it. And then make that huge entrance onto whatever stage, whatever place you're trying to be. Because, yeah, you've got to go internalize this. You've got to grow. You've got to learn. You have so many opportunities. But it is
Listen, if there
also,
was ever an invisible midlife, or ever a midlife woman who should have been much more visible than she was, it was Eleanor Roosevelt, right? Eleanor Roosevelt arguably ran our country for multiple years during World War II. And yet she was a midlife woman and nobody paid attention to her. And she said people would worry far less about what other people thought about them if they realized how seldomly they did. Like, literally nobody is paying attention to you because they're so worried thinking about themselves, in the same way that we're so worried thinking about ourselves, that we're not actually paying attention to anybody else. So go out there and fail with abandon, because failure isn't finale, it's fulcrum. It's the place where we learn, we grow, and we iterate, and we change. And by the time you're kicking ass, everybody's paying attention. Like, what an overnight success. No, you're not an overnight success. You've just been putting in the work in the dark when nobody was paying attention.
you know what? I think I've interviewed, like you have. I've gone back and I've interviewed a lot of impact millionaires and how did they do it? Very much like Think and Grow Rich. And it's interesting, this idea that people, the unicorns. I mean, they're like 0.000 all the way off the chart. There are so few of them. The rest of us have worked really hard to get to where we are. Well, I have to tell you, super excited to have you on the show, and you brought it, delivered. You are a fascinating woman. You've got so much more life to live, girl. I'm excited to read your next book, to hear your next TED talk, to do all of that, see you on the stages. One thing you did mention, I have to ask, is at the time you were like, stages, how did you become stage ready?
Oh, well, it's really funny. I've actually been debating creating a mastermind about this in the new year because I get asked this a lot. Um, I I did some speaker training, and that speaker training involved some improv. And I don't like improv. I'm a little bit of a control freak. I did advance on that presidential campaign. Like, where's the candidate going to stand? Where's the press line? Where's the Secret Service line? Like, everything is controlled. And I was trained by the Secret Service on how to do it. So improv was uncomfortable at best. And if you do enough improv and and you realize that you can actually handle anything if you sort of stand in your center of
Mhm.
expertise, then you just go in knowing what you're talking about rather than memorizing a script. I also think the other thing is, and these are just sort of super high level comments, but I think it's not really about getting comfortable speaking on stage as much as it's getting comfortable not speaking on stage. And what I mean by that is there are times when you're on stage where you actually just have to take a beat and be quiet and let the person on the other side think their thought so that they can process what you just said. And it's not, I need to slow down and speak like this. I can slow down and speak like this. And then I can go to the next thought. And I can give you space in between for you to have that reaction. And so just that understanding that it's a conversation helped a lot also.
Laura Gassner Otting, thank you so much for being here. Everyone, if you have thought of something here where it sparked you, that there was some insightful comments, I know I wrote down a whole lot of them, please let us know. Go on over, listen in again because the nuggets were so good. And come on over to on Instagram, Hilary DeCesare, DM us, put in the comments, what are you finding now? I mean, right now, you're going into this next year, and this just gave you like, it's never, you never stop. Like, really think about what you want, what you're trying to achieve. And as I always say, live now, love now, relaunch now into that next best version of yourself. And let's not get stuck in wonder how. Let's like move through it. And one of the things that we did, and it's like, it's not a final destination, it's more of a portal, Laura said in a quote once. And I have to say, I love that because let's just really find our essence. Where are we going? What are we doing? And make sure you're surrounding yourself with amazing people because that's what lights up the waves. All right, everyone, take care and we'll see you again next week. If you like this video and want to get more like it, head over here.